guys, and welcome back. So last evening I had quite the disaster, and I thought I would share with you my experience, so in hopes this doesn't happen to you. We have 2 Henry kits that are absolutely adorable. I went to use some new matte varnish. Now, I heard wonderful things about this lovely varnish, which I decided I'd give a try. It is definitely different consistency than what I'm used to. Previously, I had used matte varnish from Genesis. Genesis had been more of like a clear consistency, where this is white. Genesis also had more of a creamy feel to it, where this had a little bit more of a sticky feel. It was just something you got to get used to. Now, I thought, what a perfect time to do an experiment on 2 of the babies that I was working on to see what this would do and how I liked it. What I usually like to do when I'm doing really young babies is I do a fiber effect. With the fiber effect, you have to put down a varnish first. Once you put down the varnish, then you would apply your fibers, and that is going to be a whole nother topic in itself, which I will do a video on later. But right now I wanted to share with you about this varnish. What I have learned last night is I took one of the heads that I had, both of them being like identical. Like I said, I've been doing 2 Henry sculpts as a set of twins. One of the heads I used my fiber on, and the other I chose not to, just to see what would happen. Now, the fiber I use is a little bit different than the little jars of fiber that you can get from the doll stores. So I'll show you what I use in a second. This is the remnants of what I have left of my matte varnish. I had just a little bit of heat set that was in one of these lovely jars that I had not opened. Specifically said heat set matte varnish. You can see the difference here. This has got more of a clear consistency, and this is more white. So that took a little bit of getting used to. However, what I found was the jar that I had left from my previous Genesis matte varnish, because it's in a real small jar and I like to stir it really well, I took the remnants from this and added it into my other jar, my larger jar, so I could stir it really well. It actually applied as more of a satin varnish. Not a big deal, but just something I noticed was that it wasn't the same. So that was kind of an unfortunate thing. So I decided to go ahead and use that on one of my limbs for a previous kit, and use this on the rest, or the last limb that I needed varnish for. I decided to do this trick. After reading some reviews about other people's experiences with this stuff, I had heard that people were getting a white kind of chalky appearance when you apply the varnish not well enough, not doing specifically a certain manner. Basically, it's human error that the reason that your kit would get white. With that in mind, I applied that in addition to, I have a flocker. This is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. This is a flocker applier. It's a really cool way of doing it. So when you put your flocking in, when you get to a certain point, you basically tap the bottom of it and it will create a plume of flocking material through the top, which I would put on top of my varnish. And then going over that with my fan brush like this, you can very gently go over your fibers to create more of that Lendugo 3D appearance on top of your varnish. Unfortunately, I had used this particular brush when I had applied my new varnish, which normally I use this brush. I don't know why I grabbed this brush, so I don't know if that was a variable or not. Applied my varnish, did my flocking, went over with this guy, and did it a couple of times. Now I had noticed that I needed a little touch up here or there, so then I added a little more varnish with this brush after having done the flocking, went over it again with my little fan brush, didn't think anything of it, set it aside and let it set for minutes. This one says if you're going to use it as a primer, you can apply it directly on the surface prior to painting to smooth out the surface, which I think I might try. If you're using it as a thinning or thick medium, mix directly with your colors to achieve the consistency you want for your wash. For a matte or satin varnish, applied to the painted surface to achieve the final results you're looking for. When I was watching some of the videos about this, if you want more of a satin appearance, you do super thin layers of your varnish and you don't pounce it, from what I had seen some videos on it, but you do really thin coats. If you want more of a matte varnish, you would go over with it with a pouncer. Now I could be wrong, but that was my interpretation of some of those videos. For the pore texture, you apply it to the surface and pounce it with a textured sponge to create a realistic and porous effect. Heat to 265 for 9 minutes. According to the videos, they said 9 to 10 minutes. I chose to go with that 9 to 10 minutes versus just 9. And I wanted that porous effect. I did what I normally do, using my little sponge that I created to create that pore effect that I had done with my Genesis. So let me show you what had happened. Baby A, isn't that just sad? Baby A had the flocking done to it. When I had finished baking, the baby looked very similar to the way it does right now, but even worse. So I just about had a heart attack. And I could not figure out what in the world did I do that was wrong. Looking at baby B that did not have the flocking. So the first thing I noticed is that baby B was not nearly as bad as baby A. So I had done some deduction to figure out what I did differently between the two other than actually applying the flocking. And what I had come to was, one, I used a different brush that I normally don't use for my varnish. After I applied it on this baby, I had done some touch up after doing the flocking and applied a little bit more and did a little bit more with my fan brush. Then I set this one aside using the same brush, going over doing baby B. What my theory is that there was residual flocking material on my brush when I had applied it to baby B. Something in the flocking did not sit well with the new varnish. So after doing some research, I had read that Esther suggested if you get this white powdery effect, usually that means, and it was a human error thing, it was easily fixed by taking your solvent and applying your solvent directly using a brush, just solvent, going over those white areas to remove it. I had gone a step further and I had applied the varnish, and then using my wedge, just kind of continued to manipulate and work on the varnish that was left, trying to remove any excess varnish that maybe I had inadvertently built up unintendedly that caused part of that issue with building up too much varnish and having it get white. But I still couldn't understand, well, why did baby A that had flocking had 10 times more of the white powdery effect happen and baby B did not? And my deduction is that it is not compatible with the flocking material that I typically use, unfortunately. So I'll have to try a different flocking material. Not all flocking material or fibers are the same. After several attempts of going over the face with my thinner and trying to remove the excess with my sponge, I did not have a lot of luck. So then I had taken a paper towel, applied the thinner, and then just continually wiped away at my varnish to try to remove as much as that white powdery stuff as I could. With the baby that had no flocking, I have seen results. Not a problem, it's getting there. It's not there all the way yet, but it is definitely getting there. You can see this side looks pretty darn good compared to baby A that had the flocking, no flocking and flocking. So this one I've been able to get that white powdery stuff off by using just my thinner and my brush, wiping it with my wedge and or a paper towel in one direction going from the top of the head down. Doing the same method on this one, I have been having a lot of difficulty. So you can see how that flocking material probably reacted with the varnish. So my suggestion for you, one, that it was human error that had happened because I've never used this product before. I decided that I was going to do one more coat on another limb on a different baby to see if I had the same results as this. Let me show you. You can see here, move this aside, I wanted to do another layer of texture onto our little zippy. So I applied the new varnish onto this limb. I had ran out of the old varnish, my Genesis varnish, on the rest of the kit until I had got to this leg. By the time I got to this leg, I was out, so I decided I would go ahead and use that varnish, no flocking, and I used the right brush, not the other brush. As you can see, this leg turned out absolutely beautiful, as the way the varnish had indicated it should. These guys did not, because of using flocking material. It was an experience that was a nightmare that I hope that will never happen to you guys, and I wanted to take this horrible experience and share it with you so that hopefully that it will be something that you'll have not come encounter with yourself. So if you are using any of the fibers to make lanugo, or if you use flocking, make sure you do it on a test part first if you're applying it with the Irresistibles varnish, because I have a feeling that they're not compatible, because you can see how beautiful the varnish looks on this one without having any flocking, with a completely different brush, where this one had used the same brush with residual flocking on it, and this one had a different brush with flocking. So the flocking obviously had some kind of reaction to the varnish, so make sure you do a test part before doing that. But it was a good experiment. I did this intentionally, knowing that something could go wrong and I would have to deal with this mess, which I'm going to continue on using my straight thinner, removing as much of this varnish as I can off of these guys, and thankfully it's only taking off the top layer of the varnish or the flocking. It's leaving behind the paint untouched. It's not affecting the paint underneath. So far, I've been able to remove the flocking or the varnish with no problems. If you guys can see, you can see kind of where I had not applied varnish through the back of the head because I was intending on rooting. And so there's a little bit more of that matte finish up in the face here. You can see the difference where it's a little more shiny on the head and not so much on that face. So it is doing the job it's supposed to be doing. Esther did an amazing job at explaining what to do if you do have something like this happen. And so I'm just going to keep on working on it. My other conclusion was I use the Mona Lisa thinner, and I have a feeling that that thinner is not strong enough to effectively take off this film that had occurred, as in her videos she suggested to use solvent, specifically the word solvent. So I don't know if there's a difference between what her solvent was that she used and the thinner that I used to mix with paint. So it could be that my thinner is truly not strong enough and that I need to go into a solvent, but I'm a little leery of doing that because I don't want to damage the paint underneath. So I'm going to continue trying with my regular solvent to remove the rest of this film on these guys. If that doesn't work, then I will go to using a stronger solvent. There we are. There's our poor little Henry babies. So they are salvageable. They will take a little bit more effort and work in getting this lovely film off so that we can redo the varnish in an appropriate manner and making sure that I do it exactly as instructed and the recommendations from Irresistibles. Nothing wrong with this product whatsoever. I really, really liked how it turned out on the other limb. Just food for thought. It did not work with the flocking. Do a test part. Make sure you put it on very, very thin. It's not like Genesis where I could put Genesis on thicker. Created more of a textured effect using my sponge that I had created, where this one you can't really do that as thick. So you definitely have to go thinner with this. You have to make sure you pounce it really well to make sure there's no white left behind, because like I said, it has a white finish where Genesis was more clear. I had no issues whatsoever with the way the other limb turned out. I had applied it the same on all three parts. The variable was a different brush for these guys that had both been used with the flocking. The flocking was not happy. Rest assured, as you can see, with multiple rounds of applying our mineral spirits, I was able to get that white film off of our beautiful Henry kits. Ultimately, I had to switch out, and instead of using the Mona Lisa thinner, my daughter had let me use Masterpiece. What is this? Odorless mineral spirits. When I switched over to this one, that is really what the remedy was, to be able to get that film off. The Mona Lisa was not strong enough to be able to remove that film. Now there's still a little bit of a film left, so I'm just repeating the process continuously. Basically, I've got my nice big mop brush, and I am applying it to those areas that have white. It's not affecting the paint underneath. It is only affecting the white film. And then what I'm doing is I allow that to sit for a few minutes. A little bit left there. This one looks really good. Yeah, I think that was the only area. Now that I applied my mineral spirits, I'm going to give it a few minutes, and then I'm going to go over it with my little cotton rounds, removing any of that excess mineral spirit before it has a chance to flash back onto the vinyl, because then basically it's just going to continuously be left behind. And I need to get that film off. So I am wiping it off, wiping that excess mineral spirits off, turning my little cotton round over to make sure that I'm using a clean side. I will finish letting that flash all the way. going through. These are one of those moments that do as I say and not as I do for this particular moment. I don't want this ever to happen to you. This has been a headache of astronomical proportions, and I'm going over with those cotton rounds repeatedly, just removing that excess mineral spirits so that way I can remove any of that film with the mineral spirits and not allow it to flash back on the vinyl. And I might need to do it maybe one more time. There's still just a slight hint of a film on this guy. It looks pretty good, but there's still a little bit left. But I definitely am getting it off, so I'll probably do this a couple more rounds, and we will reapply our varnish without using the flocking, and we'll be good to go. Take this as a learning experience. I hope this never happens to you. I really appreciate you guys watching. I don't mind sharing mistakes and disasters that might come along the way with this journey of painting, with the intention that hopefully it'll be a learning experience, not just for me, but I can in turn turn that around and be a learning experience for you guys. So don't do this. Don't use the flocking without doing on a test limb. That should just be a golden rule on anything. Always do a test limb if you are doing new products or combining new products. I made the mistake of not doing that. But thank you guys for watching. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't done so already. And I will see you guys all again soon. So have a great rest of your morning, noon, or night.